I've always believed that a man's home is more than lumber nails and glass. It's a reflection of who he is, his sweat, his sacrifices, his dreams, hammered into walls and stitched into curtains. For me, that home was a timber frame cabin on the north side of Lakewood, tucked just far enough off the main road that you could hear loons on the water at night, but still close enough to town that groceries didn't spoil on the ride. Back. I was Michael Dalton, most people call me Mike, 52 years old, retired civil engineer. After 30 years of building bridges and grading highways, I thought I'd finally built something for myself, a $1.2 million retreat where I could live out my days in peace. That illusion ended the night I turned onto my gravel driveway and saw nothing but smoke where my house used to stand. The headlights of my pickup carved across the hillside, picking up silhouettes of twisted beams, and a roof collapsed like the ribs of a dead whale. Flames still licked at the remains glowing orange against the black silhouette of pine trees. The cabin I'd poured my life into was reduced to a skeleton, charred timbers reaching into the sky like blackened fingers clawing for help. My brakes squealed, gravel spitting as I stopped short. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I sat, gripping the wheel, my knuckles white, staring through the windshield as if maybe the smoke would clear and I'd realize I was mistaken, that my home still stood waiting for me. But the acrid sting in my nose told the truth. The air reeked of gasoline, so sharp, so unnatural, it burned the back of my throat. I stumbled out of the truck boots, crunching on gravel that had fused into glassy clumps under the heat. Fire trucks lined the edge of the lot, their hoses limp water dripping into steaming puddles. The men were packing up helmets under arms, faces grimy and wet with sweat. The battle was already over. A captain with a salt and pepper mustache shook his head as he approached me. "Are you the owner?" I nodded, unable to form words. He let out a breath that carried the weight of too many scenes like this. "Accelerant," he said simply. "We found evidence. This wasn't an accident. Somebody wanted this house gone." The words clanged in my skull like iron against iron. Wanted this house gone. My knees felt weak, but anger held me upright. I forced myself closer to the wreckage, the heat still radiating in waves even hours after the fire. I recognized fragments, the stone hearth I had laid by hand, now split down the middle. The iron frame of my bed warped like licorice, the safe in the corner blackened but intact. That safe had held my wife's photographs, my retirement papers, and every title and deed I owned. The thought that someone had tried to erase not just my house but my life's record made bile rise in my throat. I wanted to believe maybe it had been a random act, some drifter with a grudge, kids playing with fire. But deep down I knew better. This wasn't random. It was targeted, precise. And in my gut I already knew who had lit the match, because for months she'd been circling me like a vulture. Karen Whitfield, self-appointed queen of Lakewood Homeowners Association. She was the kind of woman who carried her clipboard as if it were the 10 Commandments, strutting up and down the neighborhood like Moses of the cul-de-sac. Her rules weren't laws. They were obsessions, mailbox heights, lawn shades, even the aesthetic consistency of holiday lights. And her favorite target, me. Why? Because I refused to bend. I never signed their covenant, never joined their little fiefdom. My land lot, 17B, wasn't part of their jurisdiction. But that never stopped Karen. Every time I saw her, she'd arch those penciled-on eyebrows, purse her lips, and remind me, "Everyone benefits from the HOA, Mike. Don't be the odd one out." I used to laugh it off. "Karen, my property isn't part of your kingdom. I'll cut my grass when I damn well feel like it." But now, standing before the charred remains of my cabin, I felt that laughter curdle into something darker. The captain's words echoed again. Somebody wanted this house gone. The scene was a grotesque kind of crime scene theater. Steam curled up into the night air, the crackle of settling wood breaking the silence. An owl hooted from the trees, as if mocking me. I crouched near the edge, careful not to cross the yellow tape. My eyes scanned the ground, half from habit as an engineer, half from instinct as a man who knew he'd been hunted. That's when I noticed it, a melted scrap of paper lodged against a scorched beam. The edges were black, but the middle remained legible enough to see bold letters: Lakewood HOA, Community Compliance Division. My breath caught. Even in its ashes, her signature was there. I stuffed the scrap into a plastic evidence bag the fire marshal had dropped. My mind was racing images of Karen's smug smile, the letters she'd mailed threatening daily fines the way she once told me. "If you're not with us, you're against us." It was no longer paranoia, it was proof. As I stood there, the night felt colder despite the lingering heat. I looked at the ruin of my home and realized my battle with the HOA had crossed a line I never thought possible. Karen hadn't just harassed me with fines or dirty looks at community picnics. She had escalated to destruction. She had burned my life to the ground. And in that moment, watching the last embers of my dream flicker out, I swore two things. First, I would rebuild stronger, smarter, untouchable. Second, I would drag Karen and her clipboard empire into court, expose her for the arsonist she was, and make her pay for every nail, every photograph, every sleepless night. Because if there's one thing 30 years of engineering taught me, it's this: structures fall when their foundations are weak, and Karen had just set fire to her own. The next morning, I returned to the ruins of my cabin in daylight. Smoke still rose from the blackened rubble, spiraling into the crisp Colorado air, like a cruel reminder that yesterday's nightmare had been real. My boots sank into damp ash as I picked through what remained. That was when I saw it again, more scraps of paper half buried in the debris. Unlike the deed locked in my safe, these papers were foreign, burnt fragments stamped with a logo I knew too well. The letters were jagged, but unmistakable: Lakewood HOA. Community compliance. I turned one piece over carefully, my fingertips smearing soot across the printed words. It looked like a violation notice, the same format Karen had stuffed into my mailbox dozens of times before. But this one was singed along the edges, as if it had been carried in the very same hands that held the match. My chest tightened. Karen hadn't just fantasized about punishing me. She had dragged her crusade into my property, my home, my sanctuary, and she had left behind her calling card. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, in the small rental I'd taken temporarily, a single lamp glowing above me, piles of ash-stained evidence spread out like a war map. I powered on my laptop and opened the feed from my outdoor security system. At first, all I saw was static. The fire had fried part of the system, but I had cloud backups. I scrolled to 2:00 a.m. and pressed play. There she was, a short figure cardigan draped over her shoulders, hair a curly halo that caught the pale light. She moved across my driveway with the casual grace of someone who felt entitled to every square foot she touched. In one hand, a 5-gallon gas can. In the other, a lighter. I froze the frame, my jaw clenched. Even in the grainy footage, I knew that posture, that walk, that smug little tilt of her chin. Karen Whitfield, HOA president. Queen of clipboards. She knelt, pouring liquid in deliberate arcs along the porch. The camera caught the shimmer of gasoline as it spilled. Then, without hesitation, she flicked the lighter. Flames whooshed to life, racing across the wooden boards like snakes of fire. She didn't even watch long enough to see the blaze consume. She simply turned cardigan swaying and walked away. But fate has a way of catching criminals from angles they don't expect. As I sat, fists shaking, my phone buzzed. A text from Frank, the neighbor 2 doors down. Mike, I heard about the fire. Check this, my front camera picked something up last night. Attached was a video file. My hands trembled as I clicked. Frank's camera had a perfect vantage point from his driveway, angled just enough to catch the road in front of my property. At 2:12 a.m., headlights appeared, then cut out. A silver crossover rolled to a stop. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She walked with a gas can clutched awkwardly against her hip. The footage zoomed in automatically. Her face, partially illuminated by the motion-activated light, was clear enough to kill any doubt. It was Karen. Her expression wasn't frantic or angry or afraid. It was calm, almost smug, like she was finishing a task on her to-do list. Water plants, collect mail, burn neighbor's cabin. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just suspicion, not just animosity. Hard proof. 2 camera angles. A paper trail literally pulled from the ashes. But my engineer's brain wouldn't let me stop there. I replayed both videos, analyzing the timestamps, the motion, the sequence. The timeline was airtight. At 1:56 a.m., traffic cam footage from the nearby intersection, something I would pull later, had captured her crossover heading north. By 2:12 a.m., she was at my property dumping gasoline. By 2:20 a.m., flames engulfed my porch. Everything lined up. I leaned forward, rubbing my temples. How many times had Karen stood in front of the HOA assembly, wagging her clipboard like a judge's gavel, accusing me of endangering property values? How many smug smirks had she flashed as she scribbled violation notices, lectured me on community spirit, or threatened to fine me into submission? Now I had her caught in the act, an HOA president turned arsonist. I couldn't help but imagine her face when she realized her mistake. Because Karen, for all her obsession with control, had overlooked one thing. Engineers like me thrive on details. Details build bridges, details expose cracks, and details caught on camera, stamped on paper, would be the very rope she used to hang herself in court. Still, a sick part of me wondered, why did she do it? Harassment I could understand. HOA fines, nuisance complaints, even lawsuits. But to torch my home, to escalate from nuisance to felony, then I remembered the letters, the emails, the threats, cancer of the community. Refusal will not be tolerated, and the one line etched into my brain like acid: if you won't join, you won't have a roof to live under. At the time, I had dismissed it as melodrama. But Karen wasn't bluffing. I poured myself a whiskey, the ice clinking as if mocking my shaking hands. Outside, the rental's porch light buzzed, casting a pale halo across the gravel driveway. I stared into the glass, wondering how someone like Karen had convinced herself she had the authority to play God with other people's lives. But as anger coursed through me, a steadier, colder thought crystallized. This wasn't just Karen anymore. This was the entire HOA machine. She was its president, its voice, its enforcer. If she had taken it upon herself to burn my home, then, in a way, the HOA itself had struck the match. And I was going to make sure both she and her little empire answered for it. That night, as the clock ticked toward dawn, I compiled everything: the HOA documents from the rubble, the video from my camera, the footage from Frank. I labeled each file, time-stamped each detail, and created backups. Redundancy was survival. When I finally closed my laptop, my hands had stopped shaking. The whiskey glass sat empty. The house I had built was gone, but in its ashes I had found something more powerful than timber and stone: evidence. And with evidence, I could build something stronger than a cabin. I could build a case that would burn brighter than any fire Karen had ever lit. The first time Karen tried to find me, I almost laughed. It was a letter delivered in a crisp white envelope, embossed with the Lakewood HOA seal, as if it were the flag of some sovereign nation. Inside was a typed violation notice, citing me for non-compliant exterior paint. The absurdity was this: my cabin wasn't painted, it was timber. Cedar logs sealed with natural stain, the same way my grandfather used to finish barns. But what made me laugh was something else entirely. I wasn't even under HOA jurisdiction. From the day I closed on Lot 17B, I knew the paperwork. As a civil engineer, I lived and breathed plats, easements, and legal descriptions. When I signed the deed, the county clerk confirmed it plainly. My parcel sat outside Lakewood HOA boundaries. There was no CC, R, no restrictive covenant, no community charter binding me. My property was independent, as sovereign as the granite it rested on. So why did Karen keep sending letters? Because Karen lived for power. She'd stand at HOA barbecues in her pastel cardigans, clutching her clipboard like a scepter, boasting about community standards and preserving property values. She thrived on control, and my independence was a threat to her little kingdom. The letters escalated. First, it was $100 fines for unsightly vegetation when wildflowers grew too tall in my meadow. Then $250 for excessive lighting because I strung bulbs along my dock. One time she demanded I remove a canoe rack because it cluttered the shoreline view. Every time I replied the same way: Lot 17B is not part of Lakewood HOA. Your notices are void. But Karen didn't hear the word void. She heard challenge. The final straw came 6 months before the fire. She mailed me a certified letter, bold header in all caps: mandatory HOA membership fee, $7,500, initiation required. I nearly choked on my coffee reading it. $7,500 demanded like tribute to a medieval queen. The letter dripped with venom. Your refusal to join undermines the harmony of Lakewood. You are a cancer on this community. Pay $7,500 immediately or face escalating action. I'd shown it to my neighbor Frank, who whistled low. She's out of her mind, Mike. Your lot ain't even in the damn HOA. She can't touch you. That was true. Legally, she had no authority. But what I underestimated was how far she would go to invent authority. After the fire, when I stood amid the ashes, I replayed every confrontation we'd had. I remembered the way her eyes narrowed whenever I refused to bend. I remembered her voice at the last neighborhood meeting I attended. If one property ignores the rules, it lowers the value for everyone else. Her words then had sounded like rhetoric. Now they sounded like motive. I needed more than suspicion. I needed ironclad proof that my land sat outside her reach. So I drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk behind the counter was a young guy named Travis, glasses slipping down his nose. When I told him what I needed, he clicked through the database, then pulled a large plat map from the shelf. We rolled it across the counter. He pointed. See, this Lakewood HOA boundary ends here at lot 17 amperes. Your 17B was sold before the HOA incorporated. Different plat, different covenants, You're not subject to them. He printed me an official copy stamped and signed. I folded it carefully, tucking it into a file that would soon become my war chest. As I left, Travis called after me, "Mr. Dalton, if they've been sending you notices, they're harassing you. Keep every one of those letters." I already had. I'd scanned them, saved the originals, even kept the envelopes with postmarks. My engineer's instinct to document everything once mocked by friends as obsessive was now my shield. Back at the rental, I laid everything out on the table: the deed, the plat map, the stack of HOA, notices, the initiation fee demand, and finally the most chilling artifact of all, the letter Karen had mailed just 2 weeks before the fire. If you continue to defy this community, don't expect to have a roof over your head much longer. At the time, I'd rolled my eyes. Now I read it as prophecy. The words jumped off the page like a confession. She hadn't just threatened me metaphorically. She had spelled it out in ink in her own hand. And then she had acted. For a moment, rage consumed me. I slammed the letter down, fists trembling. But then the engineer in me returned. Rage builds nothing. Documentation does. Cases are won not with emotions, but with evidence. So I began cataloging. Each letter got its own folder, each email printed and labeled. I photographed the burnt scraps bearing the HOA logo, tagged them with date and GPS coordinates. Every piece of evidence had to be preserved chain of custody airtight. The more I assembled, the clearer the picture became. Karen wasn't acting as a rogue neighbor. She was weaponizing the HOA's name, pretending its authority extended over me, and when I refused to submit, she escalated to arson. But here was her fatal miscalculation. She assumed intimidation worked on everyone. She assumed her clipboard carried the same weight as law. She thought fear would silence me. Instead, she had ignited something stronger than fire. Resolve. I swore right then I wouldn't just rebuild my house, I would dismantle her power. I would drag her and her HOA cronies into the bright light of a courtroom where plat maps and deeds carry more authority than any HOA charter. The law was clear. My property was sovereign. Her threats were criminal. And soon everyone, judge, jury, and neighbor alike, would see that the only person lowering property values in Lakewood was Karen Whitfield herself. That night, I pinned the county map to the wall above my desk. Across Lot 17B, I scrawled in bold marker, "Free land, not HOA." When I was younger, I believed the world ran on common sense. If something was plainly written in black and white, if property lines were mapped and stamped by the county, then that was the end of it. But I learned something. Standing in the ashes of my cabin, common sense means nothing when someone like Karen decides her clipboard outweighs the law. So I went looking for the weak link, the place where her obsession crossed into criminality. The first stop was the county office. I parked in front of the sandstone courthouse, its columns chipped by decades of mountain weather, and pushed through the heavy oak doors. The air smelled of dust and old paper. Behind the counter, clerks shuffled maps, deeds, and tax forms with the mechanical rhythm of people who had seen every kind of dispute. "Lot 17B, I said, sliding my ID across the counter. "I need every record you've got." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Boundary dispute, arson," I answered flatly. That word changed his posture. He led me to the map room walls lined with rolled plats like scrolls in an ancient library. He spread one across the counter, weighed down with brass rulers, and pointed with a pencil. "This line here, Lakewood HOA jurisdiction, stops at Lot 17A. Yours, 17B, was subdivided in '89 before the HOA incorporated. Separate plat. You're not bound by their covenants." I nodded. "Can I get that stamped?" Minutes later, I walked out with an official copy plat map, deed references, notarized, the county seal pressed into the corner. That piece of paper was a shield. But shields don't stop bullets, and Karen had already fired hers. Back at the rental, I spread my files across the dining table, burned scraps, HOA, letters, the plat map. I pulled open my email archives and scrolled. Her words glared back at me like neon signs. "Your refusal undermines community harmony. Pay $7, $500, or face consequences. You are the cancer of Lakewood." Each message was laced with arrogance, as though she were a queen demanding tribute. I printed them all, highlighting the threats. Then I reached for the stack of physical letters I had saved. One in particular chilled me to the bone. A cream-colored envelope with her neat looping handwriting. I slid it open again, though I'd already memorized every word. "If you continue to defy this community, you won't have a roof to live under. Don't test us." The letter had been mailed exactly 14 days before the fire. I held it up under the desk lamp, the paper, translucent with age spots of gasoline smoke. In another life, it might have been dismissed as melodrama, the rant of an overzealous neighbor. But paired with the videos, the accelerant evidence, the plat map, it was something far more damning. It was intent. My hand shook, not from fear this time, but from recognition. In engineering, you learn to identify load-bearing beams. Remove the wrong one, and the whole structure collapses. This letter was that beam. It was the hinge point connecting Karen's petty finds to the inferno that destroyed my cabin. I scanned it, stored copies in 3 separate drives, and placed the original in a fireproof box. Still, one piece gnawed at me. A good case isn't built on what you suspect. It's built on what you can prove. I needed corroboration beyond my own archives. So I visited the post office. The clerk on duty, an older man named Henry, adjusted his glasses as I laid the envelope on the counter. "Can you confirm this was sent from Lakewood?" I asked. He studied the postmark. "Yep, processed right here. The 3rd of March, 2:14 p.m. Can I get that in writing?" An hour later, I walked out with another signed statement. Chain of custody. Another nail in Karen's coffin. That night, I called my attorney, Linda Park. She answered on the second ring, her voice steady, professional, with just enough edge to remind me she'd fought battles nastier than mine. "Linda," I said, "I've got letters, emails, threats, and a map that proves the HOA has no jurisdiction. Send me everything," she replied without hesitation. "But make copies. Don't hand over originals until we're in discovery. And Mike, don't contact her directly. Let her dig her own hole." I laughed bitterly. "She's already standing in the ashes of mine." Linda's tone softened. "Then we'll build yours back with her money." When I hung up, I felt the first glimmer of control since the fire. For weeks, Karen had held the match, the power, the arrogance. Now I held something stronger, a paper trail. I sat back staring at the piles of evidence like blueprints of a new bridge. Every beam was labeled, every joint connected. Karen's arrogance had left fingerprints on everything, emails, envelopes, even the HOA stationery she insisted on using like royal letterhead. She had weaponized the HOA brand, believing it gave her immunity. But she was wrong. I wasn't her subject. I wasn't her serf. And soon a judge would see that her little empire was built on sand. As the clock ticked past midnight, I poured another whiskey and whispered to myself, half as promise, half as warning. "You thought you burned down my house, Karen. What you really burned was your own foundation. In engineering, you don't start construction until the foundation is tested, measured, and sound." That philosophy had guided my career, and now it guided me again, but this time the structure I was building wasn't a bridge or a dam. It was a legal case strong enough to bury Karen and her clipboard empire. I started with the obvious ownership. I laid my deed flat across the table, its notary seal gleaming under the lamp. Next to it, I placed the certified plat map I had retrieved from the county office. The thick red line showing clearly Lot 17B stood outside Lakewood HOA's jurisdiction. These 2 documents were the bedrock. Without them, Karen could pretend this was all some internal dispute. With them, I could prove she was trespassing into a world that wasn't hers. Then came the threats. I sifted through the pile of letters Karen had mailed over the last 2 years. Some were laughable complaints about dock color inconsistency, demands that I mow the meadow to regulation length. But others carried a darker edge. "You are lowering property values. If you don't comply, there will be consequences. Refusal will not be tolerated." I photographed each one front and back, highlighting the HOA letterhead, the dates, the signatures. I numbered them in order, creating a timeline. When stitched together, they told a story of escalation harassment, sharpening into threats, and threats boiling over into arson. The emails were worse. On screen, her words looked colder, less human. Digital timestamps pinned her threats to precise moments in time. One email read, "You may think you're separate, but we make the rules here. Pay $7, $500, or live with the consequences." I saved everyone, exported them into PDFs, backed them up on 3 drives, and even printed hard copies. In court, lawyers love paper, but the crown jewels of my arsenal were the videos. I copied the footage from my security cameras onto secure drives, making duplicates for redundancy. In one, Karen's cardigan swung as she poured gasoline along my porch. In another, from Frank's camera, her face tilted up toward the motion light smug, and unhurried the silver crossover parked like her getaway chariot. I knew the HOA's attorneys would try to dismiss the footage as doctored, so I called in a digital forensics expert. His report came back 2 days later. Metadata intact. No signs of tampering, chain of custody verified. His conclusion was blunt: authentic. No alterations detected. That single word, authentic, was dynamite. Next, I turned to the fire department's report. Captain Ruiz had been matter-of-fact at the scene, but his written statement carried even more weight. Strong odor of accelerant detected. Burn patterns consistent with gasoline pour. Origin point near front porch. Fire ruled arson. I highlighted every mention of accelerant and filed it in the evidence binder. Still, something in me wanted more. Not just documentation, but connections threads tying Karen's threats directly to the fire. And then I remembered the gas station. I drove to the station a mile from my property, the same one I'd seen Karen pull into countless times in her silver crossover. I asked the manager about security footage from the night of the fire. 2:00 a.m. Yeah, cameras caught everything he said, scrolling back through archives. On the screen, I saw it, Karen's car pulling up at 1:56 a.m. She stepped out, cardigan wrapped tight against the cold, and filled a red gas can. She paid cash, but the footage was clear. I nearly smiled. Fate had handed me another nail for her coffin. The manager agreed to provide a copy, and by evening I had it saved alongside the other evidence. Now I had the complete sequence. Karen buys gas, drives to my cabin, pours accelerant, lights the blaze, and leaves. In construction terms, I had built a truss, each piece connected, supporting the others. Remove one, the rest still held. Together they formed a structure no jury could ignore. But gathering evidence wasn't just about documents. It was also about people. I met Frank at his porch, the man rocking in his chair with his ever-present baseball cap pulled low. "You really think she did it, Mike?" he asked. "I don't think I said." "I know, and I need you to testify." Frank leaned forward. "Hell, I'll testify twice if it helps. I saw her walking back to that car. Ain't no mistaking her." His willingness mattered. Juries trust neighbors. They trust ordinary people who have nothing to gain. Frank would be my anchor witness. I also called Captain Ruiz. "If subpoenaed, will you confirm your report?" "Absolutely," he said. That fire didn't start itself. Piece by piece, the puzzle was locking into place. One evening, as I filed the last document into its folder, I sat back and looked at the mountain of evidence spread across my dining table. It was more than paper. It was my new house rebuilt, not from cedar and nails, but from dates, signatures, video files, and sworn statements. I realized something then. Karen had made a fatal error. She thought destruction erased proof. But fire doesn't consume everything. Some things, maps, cameras, neighbors with clear memories, survive, and when they do, they burn brighter than flames. Linda, my attorney, came by to review the files. She wore her trademark navy blazer, her hair pulled back, eyes sharp. She flipped through the binders, nodding. "This is airtight," she said. "Deed, plat, threats, video, fire report, witness testimony. We don't just have a case, we have a warhead. Once this hits court, HOA or no HOA, Karen won't wriggle free." Her words filled me with something I hadn't felt since the fire hope. That night, as I turned off the lamp, I whispered to myself, she thought she could erase me with gasoline, but I've rebuilt with evidence, and evidence doesn't burn. Thursday nights in Lakewood were reserved for HOA meetings. To most people, they were tedious affairs, lukewarm coffee and styrofoam cups, arguments about mailbox colors, and Karen Whitfield holding court like a dictator in pastel cardigans. But on this particular Thursday, the meeting was more than a gathering, it was a stage, and I was done sitting in the audience. The community center buzzed with chatter when I pushed open the double doors. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the hall, occupied by neighbors who had once whispered about my independence, some supportive, others resentful. At the front stood Karen, her hair sprayed into rigid curls, cardigan buttoned to her throat, a smile plastered across her face like a politician mid-campaign. "And thanks to decisive action," she was saying, "a dangerous eyesore has been eliminated from our neighborhood. Property values are protected. Safety has been restored." A ripple of applause followed, timid but real. I clenched my fists. Dangerous eyesore. That's what she called the home I built, board by board, the sanctuary I'd poured my savings into. I walked down the center aisle. My boots thudded against the polished floor, each step drawing more eyes, silencing the murmurs. By the time I reached the front row, the applause had withered into awkward coughs. Karen's smile faltered when she saw me. Her face drained of color, but she recovered quickly, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "Mr. Dalton," she said, with forced sweetness, "you're not a member of this HOA. This meeting is for residents only." I faced the crowd, raised my voice. "I am a resident, and I'm the resident whose house burned to the ground last week." Gasps spread through the room. People twisted in their seats, whispering to each other. Karen's composure cracked for just a second, her lips tightening. "I'd like to show you something," I said. I pulled a small projector from my bag and set it on the nearest table. A white sheet, usually used for presentations about landscaping budgets, became my screen. I hit play. On the wall, the footage appeared a figure in a cardigan carrying a gas can crouching on my porch. The room went silent. The fire burst to life in grainy black and white racing across the wood. Then came the second video, Frank's angle, Karen's face illuminated by the motion light calm as she walked back to her crossover. The silence was absolute heavy enough to crush air. "Recognize her?" I asked. My voice was steady, louder than I felt. "That's your HOA president. That's the woman who burned down my home." All eyes swung to Karen. She shook her head violently, curls bouncing. This is fake. Deepfakes are everywhere now. Anyone could have. I cut her off. Digital forensic experts have authenticated both videos. Metadata intact. No alterations. And if you need more, here's her letter. I held up the envelope, the one that said I wouldn't have a roof to live under. Murmurs rose again, louder this time. 2 weeks before the fire, I continued, she promised my roof would disappear. And 2 weeks later it did. Karen slammed her clipboard against the podium, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "Lies," she shrieked. "This man has been a thorn in our side for years. He refuses to comply, refuses to pay dues, and now he's smearing me with fabricated evidence." But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. I saw neighbors shifting uncomfortably, eyes narrowing. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads. I pressed forward, voice rising. "She calls me a cancer on the community." She demanded $7,500 for an initiation fee I never owed. She said refusal wouldn't be tolerated, and when I refused, she lit the match. I clicked again. On the screen, a new video played, gas station security footage, timestamped 1:56 a.m. Karen filling a red gas can. Her crossover clearly visible. The room erupted. "That's her car," someone shouted. "She bought gas that night," another neighbor asked, disbelief dripping from every word. Karen backed against the podium, face pale, hands trembling. "Coincidence. Anyone could own a car like that. Anyone." "Enough," I snapped. My voice cut through the uproar, and for once even Karen shut up. "I've lived here 5 years. I've kept to myself, paid my taxes, minded my own business. And yet this HOA has treated me like an enemy simply because I refused to bow to their imaginary authority. Well, I've got news for you. My property isn't under your control. And no HOA rulebook, no clipboard, and no cardigan gives anyone the right to destroy my home." I pointed directly at Karen. "You crossed from petty fines into felony arson. And I have every piece of evidence to prove it." The neighbors looked at her now, not with admiration but with suspicion, some even with disgust. One older man stood up. "Karen, is this true?" Her eyes darted back and forth, searching for an escape. "This is a setup. He's trying to ruin the HOA to ruin me. Don't let him." But her voice cracked under the weight of doubt. I gathered my projector, slid the files back into my bag, and stood tall. "This isn't the end," I said to the room. "It's the beginning. You'll see me in court. And you'll see Karen for what she truly is, not a leader, not a protector of property values, but a criminal who burned down a neighbor's home." Then I turned and walked out, leaving the whispers, the gasps, and Karen's pale, trembling figure behind me. Outside, the night air hit my face like freedom. For the first time since the fire, I felt like the one holding the match. When I walked out of that HOA meeting, I knew Karen wasn't finished. She had been cornered, but cornered animals lash out. And Karen was nothing if not vicious. By the next morning, an email blast from the HOA board was in every resident's inbox. "Beware of misinformation. Certain individuals are spreading doctored videos to defame the HOA and its leadership. These malicious lies threaten our community values." She signed it, with concern, Karen Whitfield, president. For years, her titles and her tone had been enough to silence opposition. But this time, I had a secret weapon, truth layered like reinforced concrete. My lawyer Linda called it our 3-pillar strategy. Knock out each false claim, and Karen's defense would crumble in full view of anyone watching, neighbors, judges, juries. Karen's first lie was that the HOA had authority over me. She had wielded violation notices, threats, and mandatory dues as if they were law. To dismantle that, we went straight to the plat map. At our strategy session, Linda laid it on the table like a battle flag. "Here," she said, tapping the thick red boundary line. "Lakewood HOA jurisdiction ends at lot 17 amperes. Mike's property, lot 17B, sits outside. Period. No covenant, no CC, no signature binding him." We gathered supporting documents, the deed stamped by the county, the subdivision history showing my parcel predating the HOA's incorporation, and a sworn affidavit from Travis, the county clerk, verifying my independence. When presented in court filings, that map wasn't just paper, it was dynamite. It told the judge and every neighbor that all of Karen's fines and threats were legally worthless. She had no jurisdiction, no authority. She'd been masquerading as queen over land that was never hers to rule. The first pillar collapsed. Her next claim was that my videos were fake deepfakes, she screamed at the HOA meeting. It was a desperate tactic exploiting modern fears about technology. But desperation is fragile when tested. Linda hired a digital forensics firm. They combed through the footage frame by frame, analyzing metadata timestamps, GPS logs, and checksum hashes. Their report was crystal clear. Both video files are authentic. No evidence of tampering, splicing, or synthetic generation. Metadata matches the camera models registered to Michael Dalton and Frank Simmons. Chain of custody intact. We even brought in the manufacturer of my camera system. Their technician confirmed the footage came directly from their cloud server linked to my registered account. And then came the silver bullet, the gas station footage. A separate source, independent of me or Frank, showing Karen at 1:56 a.m. filling a red gas can. The jury wouldn't need to be tech experts to understand that sequence. Buy gas, drive to my house, pour, ignite, leave. I remember Linda's smile when she stacked the reports together. They can scream deepfake all they want, but 3 different sources, all authenticated, all synchronized. No jury buys that defense. The second pillar crumbled into dust. The final piece was motive. Why would a middle-aged woman, a president of an HOA, burn down $1 million cabin? Without motive, a defense attorney could argue it was random vandalism or mistaken identity. But Karen herself had gifted us the motive wrapped in her own handwriting. We lined up every email, every letter, every envelope bearing her HOA letterhead. The threats escalated in tone, culminating in the one that said, "If you continue to defy this community, you won't have a roof to live under." Linda held it like a smoking gun. This isn't just harassment, it's premeditation. It shows intent. It ties directly to the act. We cross-referenced the timeline letter sent the 3rd of March. Fire ignited the 17th of March, 2 weeks to the day. Add the testimony of neighbors who had overheard her ranting at barbecues about making Mike pay and teaching him a lesson, and the narrative was airtight. Karen had motive obsession with control. She had opportunity caught on multiple cameras. She had means, the gas she bought and poured herself. The third pillar, the one she leaned on most, the story that I was somehow inventing her malice, collapsed with a crash so loud it echoed through the neighborhood. When we unveiled the 3 pillars in pretrial motions, Karen's lawyer tried to object, claiming context was missing. But context didn't matter when evidence was this solid. The judge allowed everything. Word spread fast. Neighbors who had once feared Karen's clipboard now crossed the street to avoid her. Parents whispered at playgrounds. One man told me, "We thought she was strict, but fair. Now we're realizing she's just a tyrant who got caught." Karen herself looked smaller every time I saw her, shoulders hunched, cardigans wrinkled instead of crisp hair, less rigid under spray. The power she once wielded with a raised eyebrow had evaporated. I should have felt triumphant. But what I felt was something heavier, inevitability. Karen had built her life on a throne of rules, punishments, and fear. And like any poorly engineered structure, the moment stress tested it, the whole thing buckled. The pillars had fallen. All that remained was to bring the rubble to court. That night, I stood in front of the empty space where my cabin had been. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of pine instead of gasoline. I looked out at the lake reflecting the moonlight and whispered, "3 down, Karen. 1 more to go." The verdict. And I knew when that moment came, it wouldn't just be my house rebuilt, it would be the balance of power in Lakewood itself. Courtrooms have a strange smell, polished wood, old paper, and the faint tang of anxiety. On the morning of my trial against Karen and the Lakewood HOA, I sat at the plaintiff's table in a navy suit I hadn't worn since retirement. My lawyer, Linda Park, adjusted her files with the calm of a surgeon. Across the aisle sat Karen, shoulders squared but eyes darting, her pastel cardigan hanging like armor that no longer fit. The judge entered the bailiff, barked for order, and 12 jurors settled into their box. This was it, the moment when months of evidence, pain, and fury would crystallize into justice. Linda began our case with precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she said, her voice steady, "this is not a dispute over lawn care or mailbox color. This is arson. This is harassment. This is a neighbor so consumed with control that she burned down a man's home." She laid out the 3 pillars we had assembled. First, the plat map proving my lot was outside HOA jurisdiction. She placed the certified copy before the jury, read boundary line clear as blood. The HOA had no authority over Mr. Dalton. Every fine, every letter was baseless. Then she turned to the videos. The projector flickered and the room watched in silence as Karen appeared, cardigan swaying, pouring gasoline on my porch. Gas station footage followed timestamps showing her filling the red can. Linda's voice never wavered. Different cameras, different angles, all authenticated, no tampering, finally motive. Linda held up the letter, the one promising I wouldn't have a roof to live under. She read it aloud, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. The words sounded like a confession carved in ink. Karen's attorney tried to object, claiming context, but the judge overruled him. The letter stayed. Then it was Karen's turn. Her lawyer painted her as a misunderstood community leader, a woman dedicated to order who had been unfairly vilified. Karen herself took the stand, tears trembling in her eyes. "I loved our neighborhood," she said, voice quivering. "I only wanted everyone to follow the rules. Mr. Dalton hated me for it. He's framing me with technology I don't understand. But cross-examination is where illusions collapse." Linda's questions came sharp as chisels. "Mrs. Whitfield, do you own a silver crossover?" "Yes." "Were you at the gas station on the 17th of March at 1:56 a.m.? Karen shifted. "I don't recall." Linda played the video. Karen's face illuminated by fluorescent lights filling the gas can. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. "Is that you?" Linda pressed. Karen stammered. "Lots of women drive crossovers, and lots of women buy gasoline," Linda cut in. "But not all of them then appear on camera, pouring that gasoline onto a neighbor's porch. Do they?" Karen's silence was damning. The fire captain testified next, explaining the accelerant patterns. Frank, my neighbor, took the stand, describing how he'd seen Karen return to her car that night. Even Travis, the county clerk, confirmed the map boundaries under oath. Each witness drove another nail into her coffin. By the time closing arguments arrived, Karen's cardigan looked less like armor and more like a shroud. Linda's final words rang in my ears. "This case isn't about HOA rules. It's about law, evidence, justice. You cannot burn a man's house down because he refuses to join your club. Today you can show that no one is above accountability, not even an HOA president with a clipboard." The jury left. 30 minutes later they returned. 30 minutes, that's all it took. On the claim of arson we fined for the plaintiff. On the claim of harassment we fined for the plaintiff. On the claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress we fined for the plaintiff. Damages awarded $5 million. My chest tightened. $5 million. Enough to rebuild, to reclaim, to send a message that echoed louder than any HOA bylaw. Karen slumped forward, face pale, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The judge ordered the HOA jointly liable, citing their complicity in allowing her reign of terror. Minutes later, the district attorney stepped forward, announcing criminal charges of arson and intimidation against Karen. The gavel fell. It was over. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shoved microphones forward. "Mr. Dalton, how do you feel?" I paused, staring at the skyline where smoke had once risen from my cabin. "Justice doesn't come in clipboards or fines," I said. "It comes in evidence." And today, evidence won. The neighbors who had once avoided me now clapped my shoulder, muttered apologies, even offers of help. Karen disappeared from Lakewood within weeks, stripped of her title, her reputation ashes like the ones she left me. Months later, I stood on the porch of my new home, a fortress of steel beams, fire-resistant siding, and a roof built to laugh at sparks. It wasn't just a house. It was a monument. Behind me, fresh walls smelled of cedar, but stronger this time, unyielding. I nailed a wooden plaque above the door. It read, "Justice is built on evidence, not on clipboards." The sun dipped low, painting the lake gold. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Karen's fire had tried to erase me. Instead, it had ignited something stronger, proof that even the most overreaching HOA tyrant could be brought to their knees. I breathed deep, the scent of pine replacing the ghost of gasoline. My house was gone, but my resolve had rebuilt something better. And I knew no HOA, no Karen, no clipboard in the world would ever burn it down again. When I look back on everything, the smoke, the rubble, the courtroom, I realize my story isn't just about a house or an HOA gone rogue. It's about power and how people misuse it. Karen thought her clipboard gave her authority. She thought rules written on HOA letterhead were stronger than deeds, maps, and the law itself. And when I refused to bend, she chose fire. But here's the truth, control built on fear always collapses. It might take time, it might take ashes, but in the end, evidence will outlast intimidation. Rebuilding my home taught me something I wish I'd learned years earlier: don't ignore small threats. Keep records, save letters, document every encounter. Because bullies don't stop when you look away, they stop when they're exposed. I walked away from court with $5 million, but the real victory wasn't the money. It was watching Karen's empire of rules crumble in front of the very people she claimed to protect. Justice didn't come easy, but it came because I refused to let fear write the ending to my story. If you've ever faced someone like Karen, whether in an HOA, a workplace, or your own neighborhood, remember this: their power only lasts as long as your silence. And now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or a Karen who thought they were above the rules? Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more HOA stories just like this. 1. Because trust me, this was only one fire in a neighborhood full of sparks.